The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Admiral Marcus Blackwood stepped out of his black sedan. His polished boots clicked against the concrete with military precision, each step echoing his authority. At 52, Blackwood had earned his reputation through decades of service, climbing the ranks with ruthless efficiency. His steel-gray eyes surveyed the bustling activity around him, noting every detail with the sharp focus that had made him one of the youngest admirals in naval history. Today was different, though. Today, he would finally meet the woman who had been causing ripples throughout the entire naval command structure, Captain Elena Vasquez, known by a nickname that made even seasoned sailors uncomfortable, Widowmaker. The name had followed her for 3 years now, whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms across every naval installation. Some said it with respect, others with fear, but Blackwood said it with disgust. He had read her file countless times, each review strengthening his conviction that she was a liability to the service. 3 dead husbands, all military men, all dying under suspicious circumstances during her deployments. The official reports always cleared her of wrongdoing, but Blackwood knew better. He had seen enough in his career to recognize patterns that others missed or chose to ignore. The first husband, Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, had died in a training accident 6 months after their wedding. Vasquez had been deployed on a different ship at the time, providing her with what appeared to be a perfect alibi. The second, Major Robert Chen of the Marine Corps, had been killed in action during a joint operation where Vasquez served as naval liaison. Again, she was cleared of any involvement. The third and most recent, Commander David Walsh, had died from what was ruled a heart attack during a routine mission. Each death had been investigated thoroughly, and each time Vasquez emerged without a stain on her record. But Blackwood saw through it all. 3 husbands, 3 convenient deaths, 3 substantial life insurance payouts. The woman was clearly a master manipulator, using her position and feminine wiles to prey on good military men. The fact that she continued to advance in rank, despite the cloud of suspicion surrounding her, only proved to Blackwood that the system was broken, corrupted by political correctness and fear of appearing discriminatory. As he entered the main administrative building, Blackwood straightened his uniform jacket. Today's meeting was officially about Vasquez's new assignment to his fleet, but he had other plans. He intended to make it clear that her reputation preceded her, and that he would be watching her every move. If she thought she could continue her deadly pattern under his command, she was gravely mistaken. The corridors buzzed with activity as personnel went about their morning duties. Junior officers snapped to attention as Blackwood passed, their crisp salutes acknowledging his authority. He acknowledged each with a brief nod, his mind focused on the confrontation ahead. He had carefully planned his approach, choosing words that would cut deep while remaining within the bounds of military protocol. Reaching the conference room, Blackwood paused outside the door. Through the glass panel, he could see her sitting at the far end of the table, reviewing documents with the same focused intensity he remembered from her service photos. Captain Elena Vasquez appeared smaller in person than he had expected, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform impeccably pressed. She looked up as he entered, rising to attention with practiced military bearing. "Admiral Blackwood," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, sir." Blackwood studied her face, searching for signs of the calculating manipulator he knew her to be. What he saw instead was a composed officer with intelligent brown eyes that met his gaze directly, without flinching or showing any hint of the guilt he expected. This only increased his certainty that she was a master of deception. "Captain Vasquez," he replied coolly, taking his seat without offering her the courtesy of sitting first. "Please sit down. We have much to discuss regarding your assignment to my fleet." As she settled back into her chair, Blackwood opened her personnel file with deliberate slowness, making sure she could see the thickness of the documentation. "I've been reviewing your record, Captain. Quite eventful, wouldn't you say?" Vasquez's expression remained neutral. "I've served in several challenging assignments, sir. I believe my performance evaluations speak for themselves." "Oh, they certainly do," Blackwood said, his tone dripping with implied meaning. "Your performance evaluations are indeed remarkable. Consistently high marks, commendations for bravery, recommendations for advancement. Truly impressive for someone with such personal challenges." He watched her carefully as he spoke, noting the slight tightening around her eyes. "Good. he thought. She was beginning to understand that he wasn't going to treat her with the kid gloves everyone else seemed to use. "I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to, sir," Vasquez replied, though her tone suggested she understood perfectly. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Come now, Captain. We're both experienced officers here. I think we can speak plainly about your rather unique situation. 3 marriages, 3 widowhoods. It's quite a streak, wouldn't you agree?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Vasquez's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained controlled when she spoke. "My personal losses have been thoroughly investigated by the appropriate authorities, Admiral. I've been cleared of any wrongdoing in each case." "Cleared, yes," Blackwood said, flipping through pages in her file. "Technically cleared. But we both know that technical clearance and actual innocence aren't always the same thing, don't we? I've been in this business long enough to recognize patterns, Captain, and your pattern is rather distinctive." He could see her hands clench slightly where they rested on the table, the first real crack in her composed facade. This was exactly what he had hoped for, to rattle her, to make her reveal her true nature. He was convinced that beneath the professional exterior lay a cold-blooded killer who had been allowed to hide behind regulations and procedure for far too long. "I want to be very clear about something, Captain Vasquez," Blackwood continued, his voice dropping to a more menacing tone. "While you may have fooled others with your act, you won't fool me. I'll be watching you very closely during your time in my fleet. Every assignment, every interaction, every decision you make will be scrutinized. The Navy may be willing to overlook your history, but I am not." The meeting was proceeding exactly as he had planned. Soon this dangerous woman would understand that her days of manipulation and murder were over. Elena Vasquez sat perfectly still, her military training keeping her posture erect despite the verbal assault. Inside, however, a familiar pain twisted through her chest, the same ache that had haunted her for 3 years. She had endured this conversation before in different forms with different people, but it never got easier. The accusations, the suspicions, the barely concealed disgust in their eyes, it all cut deeper than any physical wound she had ever received. "Admiral," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "I understand your concerns. I know how my situation appears to others. But I also know the truth, and I've learned to live with both." Blackwood scoffed, clearly unsatisfied with her response. "The truth? Please, enlighten me about this truth, Captain. Help me understand how 3 men, all in peak physical condition, all with exemplary service records, all happened to die while married to the same woman." The question hung in the air like a blade. Elena closed her eyes briefly, seeing their faces as clearly as if they were sitting beside her. James, with his infectious laugh and terrible cooking skills. Robert, who could make her smile even after the worst days. David, who had understood her nightmares better than anyone because he had his own. James died because Lieutenant Peterson forgot to check the safety protocols on the training simulator. She began, her voice taking on a distant quality. "The electrical surge that killed him could have killed anyone who was in that cockpit. The investigation found 17 safety violations that had been overlooked for months." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Blackwood. "Robert died because a sniper's bullet found the one gap in his body armor during a rescue mission in hostile territory. He was trying to save a wounded civilian when it happened. The same mission where I took shrapnel in my left shoulder trying to provide covering fire for his team." Blackwood's expression remained skeptical, but Elena continued. "And David," she paused, the most recent loss still raw despite the months that had passed. "David had an undiagnosed heart condition. The stress of deployment triggered a massive cardiac arrest. The medical examiner found severe arterial blockage that had been developing for years, likely since his early 20s. "Convenient explanations," Blackwood said dismissively. "I suppose you just happen to be the unluckiest woman in the Navy." "Yes," Elena replied simply. "I am." The admission seemed to catch Blackwood off guard. He had clearly expected her to argue, to defend herself more vigorously, or to show anger at his accusations. Instead, she sat there with a quiet dignity that only seemed to irritate him further. "You say that as if you accept it," he said, leaning forward. "As if you've resigned yourself to being a walking curse." What choice do I have? Elena asked, her composure finally showing cracks. Do you think I don't know what people call me? Do you think I don't see the way other officers look at me? Do you imagine I haven't considered that maybe, somehow, I really am cursed? For the first time since the meeting began, genuine emotion crept into her voice. I've asked myself 1,000 times if I should leave the service, if my presence somehow brings danger to the people I care about. I've spent countless nights wondering if I should isolate myself completely, never let anyone get close again. Blackwood watched her carefully, surprised by this crack in her armor. And yet you continue to serve. You continue to put others at risk. Because this is all I have left, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. Because James, Robert, and David all believed in what we do here. They believed in protecting our country, in serving something greater than themselves. They wouldn't want their deaths to be meaningless, and they wouldn't want me to abandon everything they died serving. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. And because, despite everything, I'm still a damn good officer. I've saved more lives than I've lost, prevented more disasters than I've caused, and made this Navy stronger with my service. My personal tragedies don't erase my professional accomplishments. Blackwood was taken aback by her sudden assertiveness. Sit down, Captain. We're not finished here. With respect, sir, I think we are, Elena replied, remaining standing. You've made your position clear. You believe I'm some kind of black widow who preys on military men. You've decided that I'm guilty despite multiple investigations clearing me. There's nothing I can say that will change your mind because you don't want your mind changed. She gathered her papers with precise movements, her military bearing fully restored. I know you'll be watching me, Admiral. You won't be the first and you probably won't be the last. But I also know that I'll do my job to the best of my ability, just as I always have. Your job, Blackwood said, his voice rising slightly, includes following orders and showing proper respect to superior officers. Yes, sir, it does, Elena agreed. And I do both. But it doesn't include allowing myself to be verbally abused or subjected to baseless accusations during what was supposed to be a routine assignment briefing. The tension in the room was palpable. Blackwood had clearly expected this meeting to go differently, had anticipated breaking down her defenses and exposing what he believed to be her true nature. Instead, he found himself facing an officer who refused to be intimidated, who met his accusations with quiet strength rather than guilt or anger. You're dismissed, Captain, he said finally, his voice cold with fury. Report to Commander Harrison for your specific assignment details, and remember what I said about being watched. I'll remember, sir, Elena replied, snapping to attention and delivering a crisp salute. Will there be anything else? No. Get out. As Elena left the conference room, Blackwood stared after her, his mind racing. The meeting hadn't gone as planned at all. He had expected to uncover some crack in her story, some sign of the guilt he was certain she carried. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who seemed genuinely grieved by her losses, but unbroken by them. But that only made her more dangerous in his mind. A calculating killer who showed guilt would be easier to catch than one who had convinced even herself of her innocence. He picked up her file again, studying the photos and reports with renewed determination. She might have fooled the investigators, the review boards, and even herself, but she wouldn't fool him. He had dealt with dangerous people before, and he knew that the most dangerous ones were those who believed their own lies. Elena Vasquez might think she had won this round, but the game was far from over. He would find the truth, whatever it took. Outside in the corridor, Elena walked with measured steps toward Commander Harrison's office, her face a mask of professional composure. Only when she rounded a corner and was out of sight did she allow herself to lean against the wall for a moment, taking deep breaths to steady herself. The confrontation had been worse than she had expected, and she had learned to expect the worst. Blackwood's hostility went beyond professional skepticism into something more personal and vindictive. She had faced doubt and suspicion before, but never such open contempt from a superior officer. 3 weeks into Elena's assignment with Blackwood's fleet, the Admiral's surveillance had become legendary among the crew. He appeared wherever she was working, observed her interactions with subordinates, and questioned her decisions at every opportunity. Other officers began to notice the unusual attention, creating an atmosphere of tension that rippled through the entire command structure. Elena maintained her professional demeanor despite the constant scrutiny, but the stress was beginning to show. She worked longer hours, double-checked every report, and avoided casual conversations with her fellow officers. The isolation was familiar yet painful, reminding her of the months following each of her husband's deaths, when suspicion and whispers had followed her everywhere. Commander Sarah Harrison, Elena's direct supervisor, finally decided to address the situation. She found Elena in the communications center at 11 o'clock at night, alone except for the duty officers, reviewing intelligence reports that should have been handled by junior staff. "Captain Vasquez," Harrison said, approaching her workstation. "A word, please." Elena looked up from her computer screen, her eyes slightly red from strain. "Of course, Commander. Is there a problem with the morning briefing preparations?" The problem isn't with your work," Harrison replied, pulling up a chair beside her. "Your performance has been exemplary, as always. The problem is that you're trying to do the jobs of 6 people because you're afraid of giving Admiral Blackwood any ammunition to use against you." Elena's fingers paused over the keyboard. "I'm simply ensuring that all tasks are completed to standard, ma'am, at the cost of your health and sanity," Harrison observed. "When's the last time you had a full night's sleep? When's the last time you ate a proper meal instead of grabbing something from the vending machine?" The concern in Harrison's voice was genuine, and Elena felt her carefully maintained composure waver slightly. "I appreciate your concern, Commander, but I can handle the workload." "I'm sure you can," Harrison agreed. "But you shouldn't have to. Look, Elena, I know what the Admiral is doing. Hell, half the fleet knows what he's doing. It's unprofessional, and it's creating problems for everyone under his command." Elena saved her work and turned to face Harrison fully. "What are you suggesting, ma'am?" "I'm suggesting that you file a formal complaint about harassment from a superior officer," Harrison said bluntly. "What Blackwood is doing goes far beyond normal command oversight. He's conducting a personal vendetta, and it's affecting unit morale and efficiency." "You know I can't do that," Elena replied quietly. "Any complaint I file will be seen as an admission that I can't handle the pressure, or worse, as proof that I'm hiding something. The Admiral would use it as evidence that I'm trying to deflect legitimate scrutiny." Harrison frowned, knowing Elena was right. The military's old boys network was still strong enough that a junior officer's complaint against an admiral would likely backfire, especially when that officer was already under a cloud of suspicion. "Then what do you suggest?" Harrison asked. "Because this situation can't continue indefinitely." Before Elena could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The general quarters alarm meant all hands to battle stations. Something serious was happening. Both women immediately forgot their conversation and rushed toward the command center. The scene in the command center was controlled chaos. Officers and enlisted personnel moved with practiced efficiency as reports flooded in from various stations. Admiral Blackwood stood at the center of it all, his face grim as he processed incoming information. "What's the situation?" Harrison asked as she and Elena approached. "Merchant vessel in distress approximately 40 nautical miles northwest of our position," reported Lieutenant Commander Phillips. "They're taking on water and have engine failure. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly with 8-foot swells and increasing winds." Blackwood glanced at Elena as she took her position at the communications console. "Captain Vasquez, establish contact with the Coast Guard and coordinate our response with their search and rescue operations." "Aye, sir," Elena replied, immediately beginning to work the radio systems. As she coordinated with various agencies, Elena's natural competence and calm under pressure became evident to everyone in the command center. Her voice remained steady as she relayed critical information, organized rescue assets, and maintained communication with the distressed vessel. "Admiral," she reported after several minutes of intense activity, "the merchant vessel Pacific Star has 12 crew members aboard. They've lost main power and their emergency pumps are failing. They estimate they have maybe 2 hours before the vessel is in danger of sinking." "Coast Guard response time?" Blackwood asked. 4 hours minimum in these weather conditions, sir," Elena replied. "Their nearest cutter is responding, but we're the only military vessel close enough to provide immediate assistance. Blackwood studied the tactical display showing their position relative to the distressed vessel. The weather was indeed worsening, with storm conditions moving in from the west. A rescue operation in these conditions would be dangerous for everyone involved. Recommendations? He asked the assembled officers. We need to launch the rescue. Boats immediately if we're going to reach them before the weather gets worse, suggested Commander Phillips. The seas are already at the limit for safe boat operations, warned Lieutenant Commander Torres from the navigation station. If conditions deteriorate much more, we'll be risking our own people. Elena had been monitoring multiple communication channels while the discussion continued. Admiral, she said, I've been in contact with the ship's captain. He reports that 3 of his crew members are injured, including one with what appears to be internal bleeding. They need immediate medical attention. The weight of the decision settled over Blackwood's shoulders. Launching a rescue operation in borderline conditions risked Navy personnel for the sake of merchant sailors. Not launching it almost certainly meant watching 12 people die. Captain Vasquez, he said suddenly, you've reviewed the weather data and communications traffic. What's your assessment of our chances for a successful rescue? Elena was surprised by the direct request for her opinion, especially given their recent relationship. But this wasn't about personal animosity. This was about saving lives. The window is closing rapidly, sir, she said without hesitation. If we launch within the next 20 minutes, I believe we can reach them and return safely. Beyond that, the risk becomes unacceptable. And you base this assessment on what? Weather. Tracking data shows the storm front moving faster than originally predicted, Elena explained, calling up displays on the main screen. However, there's a small gap in the storm system that should give us approximately 3 hours of manageable conditions if we time it correctly. Blackwood studied the data she presented, cross-referencing it with reports from other sources. Her analysis was thorough and appeared accurate. Very well, he decided. Launch rescue operations immediately. Captain Vasquez, you'll coordinate communications and weather monitoring. I want constant updates on conditions. Aye, sir, Elena replied, already turning back to her console. As the rescue operation began, Elena found herself working more closely with Admiral Blackwood than she had since arriving at his command. Despite his personal animosity toward her, he was professional enough to recognize competence when he saw it. Her weather predictions proved accurate, her communications coordination was flawless, and her calm demeanor helped maintain order in the command center during the tense hours that followed. The rescue boats reached the Pacific Star just as the weather began to turn truly dangerous. Working against deteriorating conditions, Navy rescue teams managed to evacuate all 12 crew members, including the seriously injured sailor, who was immediately transferred to the ship's medical bay. As the last rescue boat returned safely to the ship, a collective sigh of relief went through the command center. 12 lives had been saved, and no Navy personnel had been lost or seriously injured. Excellent work, everyone, Blackwood announced to the assembled officers and crew. Your professionalism and skill under pressure exemplify the best traditions of the Navy. His eyes met Elena's briefly, and for a moment some of the hostility seemed to fade. She had performed flawlessly under pressure, demonstrating exactly the kind of competence and dedication that made a good officer. But as quickly as the moment came, it passed, and the familiar coldness returned to his expression. The successful rescue operation should have been a turning point, but Admiral Blackwood's suspicions only seemed to deepen. In his mind, Elena's competence during the crisis was just another piece of evidence supporting his theory about her true nature. A woman capable of such calm calculation under pressure, he reasoned, would certainly be capable of manipulating situations to her advantage in more sinister ways. 2 days after the rescue, Blackwood called Elena to his office again. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Captain Richard Stone, the fleet's chief legal officer, sat beside him, a thick folder of documents spread across the table. Captain Vasquez, Blackwood began without preamble, I've been conducting a thorough review of your service record with Captain Stone's assistance. We've uncovered some interesting patterns that weren't apparent in previous investigations. Elena felt her stomach tighten, but she maintained her composure.
What kind of pattern, sir?
Stone opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Each of your husbands received significant life insurance payouts upon their deaths. The total amount exceeds $2 million. Yes, sir, Elena replied. Military personnel are encouraged to maintain adequate life insurance coverage. All 3 of my husbands followed that guidance. Indeed they did, Blackwood said, leaning back in his chair. But what's interesting is that in each case, you were deployed or assigned to positions that gave you access to information about their missions, training schedules, or medical conditions. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting that I somehow used classified information to arrange my husband's deaths? I'm suggesting, Blackwood said carefully, that someone with your intelligence and access to information could potentially manipulate situations to create what appear to be accidents. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elena stared at both men, seeing the conviction in their eyes. They truly believed she was a killer, and they thought they had found the evidence to prove it. Let me understand this correctly, Elena said slowly. You believe that I somehow caused an electrical malfunction in a training simulator while I was on a ship 300 miles away. You think I arranged for a sniper to shoot my husband during a combat operation in Afghanistan, and you're convinced I gave my 3rd husband a heart attack using my mystical powers. We're suggesting, Stone interjected, that someone with your background in communications and intelligence could have found ways to influence these situations remotely. Elena stood up abruptly, her patience finally exhausted. This is insane. You're creating conspiracy theories to support a conclusion you've already reached. Where's your evidence? Where are the communications logs showing me interfering with equipment? Where are the witness statements placing me in contact with enemy snipers? Where's any proof whatsoever that I did anything except grieve for 3 good men? Blackwood remained calm in the face of her outburst. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, Captain. A skilled operator would know how to cover her tracks. A skilled operator, Elena repeated, her voice rising. So now I'm some kind of master spy? Some black ops assassin who kills her own husbands for insurance money? Do you hear how ridiculous this sounds? Lower your voice, Captain, Blackwood warned. You're addressing superior officers. Elena forced herself to sit back down, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed rage. With respect, sirs, this isn't an investigation. This is a witch hunt. You've decided I'm guilty, and you're working backward to find evidence that supports your theory, while ignoring everything that contradicts it. The facts speak for themselves, Stone said. 3 dead husbands, $2 million in insurance payouts, and a woman who shows remarkably little emotion about any of it. Remarkably little emotion? Elena's voice was barely controlled. You want to see emotion? You want to see what it's like to wake up every morning for 3 years knowing that everyone you work with thinks you're a murderer? You want to understand what it feels like to have every relationship, every friendship, every professional interaction poisoned by suspicion? She stood again, this time moving to the window that overlooked the harbor. James loved old movies and terrible puns. He cried during The Notebook and pretended he didn't. Robert collected vintage comic books and made the best pancakes I've ever tasted. David played guitar and sang to me when I had nightmares about losing him too. When she turned back to face them, tears were streaming down her face. You want emotion? Here's emotion. I love them. All of them. And they're gone. And instead of being allowed to grieve like a normal widow, I have to defend myself against accusations from people who never knew them, never saw how happy we were together, never witnessed the pain I went through when each of them died. Blackwood and Stone exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this display of raw grief. They had expected defensiveness, anger, or calculation, but not this outpouring of genuine sorrow. Tears can be manufactured, Captain, Blackwood said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Elena laughed bitterly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Of course they can. In your world, everything I do is evidence of guilt. If I'm calm, I'm a cold-blooded killer. If I show emotion, I'm manipulating you. If I defend myself, I'm deflecting. If I don't defend myself, I'm admitting guilt. There's literally nothing I can do that won't confirm your suspicions. She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. You know what the real tragedy is? James, Robert, and David would be ashamed of you both. They believed in justice, in fairness, in the principles this military is supposed to represent. They would be disgusted to see their fellow officers conducting a vendetta against their widow, based on nothing but prejudice and conspiracy theories. You're dismissed, Captain, Blackwood said quietly. Elena snapped to attention one final time. Sir, before I go, I want to make something clear. I know you're going to continue this harassment. I know you'll keep looking for ways to destroy my career and my reputation. But understand this, I won't resign. I won't transfer. I won't give you the satisfaction of driving me out of the service that my husband's died protecting. She opened the door, then paused. And, sir, if you ever find real evidence that I harmed those men, I'll be the first person to turn myself in. Because if I somehow caused their deaths, even accidentally, I would deserve whatever punishment you could devise. But until you have that evidence, I suggest you start acting like the officer you're supposed to be, instead of the bully you've become. After Elena left, Blackwood and Stone sat in uncomfortable silence. The meeting hadn't gone as planned. Instead of breaking her down or tricking her into revealing inconsistencies in her story, they had witnessed what appeared to be genuine grief and righteous anger. What do you think? Stone asked finally. Blackwood stared at the door Elena had closed behind her. I think she's either completely innocent or the best actress I've ever encountered. And if she's innocent? The question hung between them like an accusation. If Elena Vasquez was innocent, then they had spent weeks systematically harassing a grieving widow, abusing their authority to pursue a personal vendetta based on nothing but suspicion and circumstantial evidence. She's not innocent, Blackwood said finally, but his voice lacked the certainty it had carried before. She can't be. Stone began gathering the documents spread across the table. Marcus, maybe we should consider the possibility that we're wrong about this. The investigations were thorough, conducted by competent people with no reason to cover for her. Maybe sometimes bad things just happen to good people. Blackwood turned away from the door to face his colleague. Or maybe she's just very, very good at what she does. But even as he spoke the words, doubt was creeping into his mind. The woman who had just left his office didn't match the profile of a calculating killer. Her grief seemed real, her anger justified, her professionalism unshakable despite weeks of provocation. For the first time since beginning his campaign against Elena Vasquez, Admiral Marcus Blackwood wondered if he might be wrong. And if he was wrong, he had committed a grave injustice against an officer who had already suffered more than her share of tragedy. The thought should have brought relief, but instead it filled him with a cold dread. Because if Elena Vasquez was innocent, then Marcus Blackwood was the villain in this story. The breaking point came 3 days later during what should have been a routine training exercise. Elena was serving as communications coordinator for a joint operation involving multiple ships when Admiral Blackwood decided to test her under pressure by deliberately introducing complications and false emergencies into the scenario. What he didn't expect was for a real emergency to occur. Simultaneously, the exercise was proceeding. Normally, when Lieutenant Torres suddenly called out from the radar station, Admiral, I'm showing multiple fast-moving contacts approaching from the southeast. Configuration suggests hostile patrol boats. Blackwood's head snapped up from the exercise paperwork. Confirm that, Lieutenant. Are we sure these aren't part of the training scenario? Negative, sir, Torres replied, his voice tense. These contacts are not on any exercise roster, and they're approaching at attack speed. The command center transformed instantly from training mode to combat readiness. Exercise parameters were abandoned as real-world crisis management took over. Elena, still at her communications station, began coordinating with higher command and neighboring vessels while simultaneously trying to establish contact with the approaching boats. Unknown vessels. This is U.S. Navy vessel Intrepid, she broadcast over maritime frequencies. You are approaching United States Navy ships conducting training operations. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. There was no response except radio static. Admiral, reported Commander Phillips from the weapons station. The approaching vessels are maintaining attack formation and speed. If they continue on current course, they'll be within weapons range in 12 minutes. Blackwood found himself in the nightmare scenario every naval commander dreaded. Potential combat with an unidentified enemy, while responsible for multiple ships and hundreds of personnel. His mind raced through protocols and possibilities while Elena continued attempting communication with the unknown vessels. Still no response from the approaching boats, sir, Elena reported. However, I'm picking up encrypted communications between them on military frequencies. The encryption pattern is consistent with known hostile forces operating in this region. Can you break the encryption? Blackwood asked. Working on it, sir, Elena replied, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she initiated decryption protocols. I need approximately 3 more minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like hours. The unknown vessels continued their approach while Elena worked frantically to decode their communications. Other ships in the training exercise had been alerted and were taking defensive positions, but the situation remained dangerously unclear. Got it, Elena announced suddenly. Sir, they're discussing attack plans. They believe we're a merchant convoy based on our earlier exercise transmissions. They don't realize they're approaching military vessels. Are you certain? Blackwood demanded. Yes, sir. They're planning to disable what they think are cargo ships and board them for robbery. They have no idea they're about to attack the United States Navy. This information changed everything. Instead of a potential international incident with unknown military forces, they were dealing with pirates who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Blackwood quickly formulated a response plan. All vessels, this is Admiral Blackwood, he broadcast to his fleet. We are dealing with hostile pirates approaching under the mistaken belief that we are civilian targets. Prepare to demonstrate our true capabilities. All ships, active radar, weapon systems online, full military posture. Let's show them what they're really dealing with. The effect was immediate and dramatic. One by one, the Navy ships dropped any pretense of being civilian vessels. Powerful military radars lit up the approaching boats. Weapon systems tracked their movements, and radio channels crackled with unmistakably military communications. Elena continued monitoring the pirates' communications as their confusion and growing panic became evident. Sir, they've realized their mistake. They're discussing immediate withdrawal. All hostile vessels, Blackwood broadcast on open frequencies. This is Admiral Marcus Blackwood, United States Navy. You have approached United States military vessels with apparent hostile intent. You will immediately reverse course and depart this area or face the consequences. The response was swift. The approaching boats turned sharply and began retreating at maximum speed, their radar signatures quickly fading as they disappeared over the horizon. Threat eliminated, reported Commander Phillips. All hostile contacts departing the area at flank speed. A collective sigh of relief went through the command center. What could have been a serious international incident or actual combat had been resolved without firing a shot, largely due to Elena's quick thinking in breaking the pirates' encryption and determining their true intentions. Outstanding work. Everyone, Blackwood announced to the command center crew. Captain Vasquez, your communications work and cryptographic analysis were instrumental in resolving the situation safely. Elena looked up from her station, surprised by the public praise. Thank you, sir. Just doing my job. But as the immediate crisis faded, Blackwood found himself genuinely impressed by Elena's performance under real pressure. She had worked calmly and efficiently while potential combat loomed. Her technical skills had provided crucial intelligence, and her communications coordination had kept all units informed and ready. Later that evening, Blackwood sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the day's events and Elena's performance reports. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he had been wrong about her. The woman who had performed so professionally under life or death pressure didn't match his image of a calculating killer. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called. Commander Harrison stepped inside, her expression serious. Admiral, I need to speak with you about Captain Vasquez. Blackwood gestured to a chair. What about her? Sir, I've been watching what's been happening these past few weeks, and I think you need to know something about Elena's background that isn't in her official file. Blackwood leaned forward, his attention focused. Go on. Harrison took a deep breath before continuing.
Sir, Elena Vasquez wasn't just married to 3 military men who died tragically.
She specifically sought out relationships with men who were already in dangerous assignments because she understood the risks involved. I'm not following, Blackwood said. Admiral, Elena has spent her entire adult life surrounded by death. Her father was killed in Iraq when she was 17. Her brother died in Afghanistan when she was 22. She joined the Navy partly to understand the world that had taken her family, and partly because it was the only world she knew how to navigate. Harrison pulled out a folder she had brought with her. The 3 men she married weren't random victims, sir. They were all dealing with their own trauma from combat deployments. James Morrison had survivor's guilt from losing his entire squadron in a training accident before he met Elena. Robert Chen was struggling with PTSD from multiple combat tours. David Walsh had chronic nightmares and anxiety from his experiences in submarine warfare. Blackwood felt something cold settling in his stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Elena Vasquez has spent her life being attracted to broken soldiers because she understood their pain. She didn't prey on strong men. She loved damaged ones and tried to help them heal. The fact that they died wasn't because she was dangerous to them. It was because she consistently chose men who were already living with the consequences of serving in dangerous situations." The revelation hit Blackwood like a physical blow. "How do you know all this?" "Because I served with James Morrison before his death," Harrison replied quietly. He talked about Elena constantly, about how she understood his nightmares, how she helped him deal with his guilt, how she made him feel normal again. He was planning to propose when he died in that training accident. Harrison opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. Robert Chen's squad members have stayed in touch with Elena since his death. They consider her family because of how much she meant to Robert. And David Walsh's sister has been Elena's closest friend for 5 years. These people don't think Elena is dangerous. They think she's an angel who tried to save men who were already broken. Blackwood stared at the photographs showing Elena at memorial services, comforting other grieving family members, participating in support groups for military widows. In every image, she appeared to be giving comfort rather than receiving it, supporting others who were dealing with loss. "Admiral," Harrison continued, "the reason Elena shows less grief than you might expect isn't because she didn't love these men. It's because she's had practice dealing with loss, and because she's learned to be strong for everyone else who's grieving. She's not a predator. She's a survivor who keeps choosing to love people despite knowing how much it might hurt." The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. If Harrison was right, then Elena Vasquez wasn't a calculating killer at all. She was a woman who had been repeatedly traumatized by loss, but continued to open her heart to men who needed healing, knowing the risks involved. "Commander," Blackwood said quietly, "why didn't you tell me this before?" The next morning, Admiral Blackwood stood outside Elena's quarters, a thick envelope in his hand and the weight of his mistakes heavy on his shoulders. He had spent most of the night reviewing Elena's complete service record, reading the testimonials from her deceased husband's families and fellow service members, and coming to terms with the magnitude of his error in judgment. When Elena opened the door, she was clearly surprised to see him. She snapped to attention immediately, but her eyes showed wariness rather than respect. "Admiral," she said formally. "How can I help you, sir?" "Captain Vasquez, may I come in? We need to talk." Elena hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to allow him entry. Her quarters were spartanly furnished but impeccably maintained. What caught Blackwood's attention immediately were the 3 photographs on her desk. Her deceased husbands in their dress uniforms, each image surrounded by small mementos and flowers. "Please sit down," Blackwood said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Elena remained standing. "Sir, if this is another interrogation, I'd prefer to have Commander Harrison present." "It's not an interrogation," Blackwood replied quietly. "Captain, I owe you an apology. More than that, I owe you an explanation and an attempt to make things right." Elena's expression didn't change, but she slowly took a seat across from him. "I'm listening, sir." Blackwood pulled out the envelope and set it on the table between them. "Yesterday, Commander Harrison provided me with information about your background that wasn't in your official file. Information that completely changes my understanding of your situation." He opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. "I spent the night reading testimonials from the families of your deceased husbands, from their fellow service members, from people who knew all of you. I also reviewed psychological profiles and trauma assessments that paint a very different picture than the one I had constructed in my mind." Elena glanced at the documents but remained silent. "Captain, I've learned that each of your husbands was dealing with significant psychological trauma from their military service. I've learned that you specifically sought relationships with men who needed emotional support because you understood their pain from your own family losses. I've learned that you've been providing comfort and assistance to other military families dealing with loss for years." Blackwood's voice grew quieter as he continued. "Most importantly, I've learned that my entire assessment of your character was not only wrong, but destructively so. You're not a predator who preys on military men. You're someone who consistently chooses to love people despite knowing how much loss hurts, because you believe they deserve compassion and support. Elena finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. And what difference does this make now, Admiral? The damage is done. Every officer in this fleet knows you suspect me of murdering my husbands. My reputation is destroyed regardless of what you've learned. You're right, Blackwood admitted. I can't undo the damage I've caused to your reputation or your emotional well-being. But I can acknowledge my mistakes publicly and take steps to correct them. He pulled out another document from the envelope. This is a formal letter of commendation for your exemplary performance during yesterday's crisis situation. It will be entered into your permanent record and distributed to all senior officers in the fleet. Elena glanced at the commendation, but her expression remained skeptical. A letter of commendation doesn't erase weeks of harassment, sir. No, it doesn't, Blackwood agreed. Which is why I'm also submitting a formal report to Naval Personnel Command documenting my inappropriate conduct toward you and recommending that any negative fitness reports or performance evaluations I've submitted regarding your service be removed from your record. This got Elena's attention. You're reporting yourself for misconduct? Yes, Blackwood said simply. What I did was wrong, professionally and personally. I allowed prejudice and unfounded suspicion to override my judgment as an officer. I harassed a subordinate based on circumstances beyond her control. That behavior violates everything I swore to uphold when I accepted my commission. Elena studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation. What she saw instead was genuine remorse and shame. Why now? What changed your mind? Seeing you perform under real pressure yesterday made me realize that my assessment of your character was completely wrong, Blackwood replied. But more than that, learning about your actual background made me understand that I wasn't just wrong about your guilt. I was wrong about who you are as a person. You're not someone who brings death to others. You're someone who brings comfort to people who are already dealing with death. He stood up and moved to the photographs on her desk. James Morrison, Robert Chen, David Walsh. Commander Harrison told me about their struggles with trauma and how you helped them heal. I want you to know that I understand now that losing them wasn't something that happened to you because of some curse or malicious intent. It was something that happened to you because you chose to love men who were already carrying wounds from their service. Elena felt tears threatening, but she fought them back. They were good men, Admiral. They deserved better than what happened to them. Yes, they were, Blackwood agreed, and they were fortunate to have someone who understood their pain and tried to help them heal. The fact that they died despite your love and support doesn't diminish what you gave them or make you responsible for their deaths. He returned to his seat and looked directly at Elena. Captain, I know my apology can't undo the harm I've caused, but I want you to know that it comes from genuine remorse. I've spent 28 years in the Navy, and this is the worst failure of judgment I've ever committed. I allowed personal prejudice to override professional standards, and I caused significant harm to an officer who didn't deserve it. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had said. Admiral, why should I believe this isn't just another manipulation? How do I know you won't change your mind again tomorrow? Because, Blackwood said, pulling out one final document, I'm requesting a transfer to a different command. I don't think I can effectively lead this fleet knowing that my conduct has undermined morale and created an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. My request will go to Naval Personnel Command this morning. Elena stared at him in shock. You're leaving? Yes. And before I go, I want to make sure that every officer and enlisted person in this fleet understands that Captain Elena Vasquez is an exemplary officer who has my complete confidence and respect. The suspicions I harbored about you were unfounded and unprofessional, and any officer who continues to treat you with anything less than the respect due your rank and service record will answer to me personally. Elena felt overwhelmed by the sudden reversal. After weeks of harassment and suspicion, the man who had been her primary tormentor was not only admitting his mistakes, but taking concrete steps to repair the damage. Admiral, she said quietly, I appreciate your apology and your efforts to make things right. But the real question is whether you've learned something from this experience that will make you a better officer in the future. Blackwood nodded slowly. I've learned that assumptions can be more dangerous than enemy fire. I've learned that prejudice can corrupt judgment even in people who should know better. And I've learned that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about other people say more about our own character than theirs. He stood to leave, then paused. Captain, one more thing. The nickname Widowmaker, it needs to stop. You're not a bringer of death. If anything, you're someone who brings life and hope to people who are struggling with trauma and loss. I'll make sure that everyone in this fleet understands that. After Blackwood left, Elena sat alone in her quarters, staring at the photographs of her husbands. For the first time in months, she felt something that had been absent from her life. Hope. Not hope that the pain of losing them would disappear, but hope that she might finally be able to serve with dignity and respect instead of suspicion and isolation. 3 weeks later, Admiral Blackwood's transfer was approved, and he departed for his new assignment at Naval Personnel Command. His final act as fleet commander was to issue a fleet-wide commendation for Captain Elena Vasquez, citing her exceptional service, professional competence, and dedication to her fellow service members. The commendation was read aloud at the change of command ceremony, in front of hundreds of officers and enlisted personnel. It officially put to rest the suspicions and rumors that had plagued Elena's service, and established her reputation as an officer of unquestioned integrity. As Blackwood prepared to leave the ship for the last time, he encountered Elena near the gangway. She saluted him with proper military courtesy, but there was something else in her expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that he had tried to make things right. "Admiral," she said, "I hope your new assignment goes well." "Thank you, Captain," he replied, "and I hope you get the career and respect you deserve. You're a good officer and a good person, and this fleet is better with you in it."